In the spring of 2023, a quiet decision reshaped the global financial order. Without headlines, emergency meetings, or breaking news banners. No markets crashed that day. No speeches were made. Yet something fundamental cracked beneath the surface of the world economy. For nearly half a century, one rule had quietly governed global trade. If you wanted oil, you paid in dollars. That rule wasn't written into law. It wasn't enforced by treaties. It existed because everyone believed it would always exist. Then it didn't. When the world's largest oil exporter agreed to sell energy to its biggest customer using a currency other than the dollar, it wasn't just a trade adjustment. It was a signal that the invisible glue holding the dollar at the center of global commerce was weakening. History tells us something uncomfortable about moments like this. Dominant currencies don't collapse overnight. They decay in stages. Predictable stages, repeating stages. Empires don't recognize the moment decline becomes irreversible. They always believe they're immune, too large, too powerful, too essential to fail. They never are. What's happening now isn't theory or ideology. It's pattern recognition based on 5 centuries of financial history, and every warning light says we've entered the most dangerous phase yet. A reserve currency isn't just a popular medium of exchange. It's the foundation layer of the global economic system. When countries trade, borrow, or stabilize their own currencies, they rely on reserves, foreign money they trust to hold value under stress. When one currency becomes the preferred reserve, extraordinary advantages flow to the nation that issues it. Global demand becomes permanent. Other countries must acquire and hold your currency just to function in international markets. That demand exists even if your economy weakens. Borrowing becomes cheap. Governments and institutions worldwide purchase your debt, allowing you to run deficits that would cripple any other nation. Inflation becomes exportable. When money supply expands, the cost isn't felt domestically alone. It spreads across the global system. And perhaps most important of all, real goods flow inward. Energy, labor, manufacturing, and commodities are exchanged for paper or digits created at near zero cost. This isn't immoral or conspiratorial, it's structural, and it's why reserve currency status has always been the ultimate economic advantage. But it's also why losing that status is catastrophic. When demand vanishes, the system snaps back to reality, often violently. Reserve currencies don't last forever. They follow a cycle that repeats with eerie consistency. First comes dominance. Economic strength, military reach, and trade control create trust. The currency becomes the safest place to park value. Then comes expansion. With global demand guaranteed, borrowing increases, spending grows, commitments multiply. Eventually, overreach sets in. Costs rise faster than productivity. Debt piles up. Competitors study weaknesses. Alternatives emerge, not to overthrow the system immediately, but to reduce dependence on it. Confidence cracks. Trust erodes quietly at first, then suddenly. At a critical moment, networks flip. It becomes easier to operate outside the dominant currency than within it. A crisis accelerates the collapse. And finally, replacement occurs, not with disappearance, but with demotion. This pattern destroyed every reserve currency before the dollar. Different eras, different technologies, same structure. The most dangerous phase is never the collapse itself. It's the moment when alternatives become viable at scale. That's where we are now. No currency becomes dominant by accident. Each reserve currency rose alongside real power. Portugal controlled global spice routes when spices were worth more than gold. Its currency dominated Asian trade because Portuguese ships controlled access. The Dutch built the most advanced financial system in Europe. Merchants trusted Dutch markets, banks, and shipping more than any alternative. Britain commanded the seas, ran the largest empire in history, and anchored its currency to gold. The pound became synonymous with stability. The United States emerged from World War II economically untouched, militarily unmatched, and holding most of the world's gold. The dollar inherited the crown. In every case, dominance was earned, not declared. But dominance also created blind spots. Once trust became automatic, discipline weakened. Power felt permanent. It never was. At the height of dominance, the same mistake always appears. Military commitments multiply, foreign interventions expand, Spending outpaces productive capacity. Debt becomes structural, not temporary. The currency remains strong, not because fundamentals are healthy, but because inertia masks the damage. Portugal tried to control trade routes across half the globe with a population smaller than a modern city. The Dutch fought wars their economy couldn't sustain. Britain maintained empire long after rivals surpassed its industrial output. The United States followed the same path: global military presence, endless borrowing, and monetary expansion justified by necessity. At peak power, warning signs are ignored because the system still works, until it doesn't. Alternatives don't begin as threats, they begin as insurance. Rival powers build parallel systems not to replace the dominant currency immediately, but to ensure survival if access is restricted. New trade routes emerge, new financial institutions form, new settlement mechanisms develop. For decades, these systems seem insignificant, then suddenly they aren't. What looks redundant at small scale becomes essential under pressure. The dominant power rarely notices until adoption reaches critical mass. By then, reversal is impossible. When dominance feels threatened, currency power is often weaponized. Sanctions, asset freezes, payment exclusions. Each action seems justified in isolation. Together, they send a message to every neutral observer: your assets are only safe until they aren't. This is the moment fear replaces trust. Countries don't need to oppose the system to abandon it. They only need to realize they could be next. History shows this always accelerates the decline. Defensive alternatives turn into preferred ones. Control becomes the catalyst for collapse. Once trust cracks, reserve share begins falling. At first, the decline looks manageable. Percentages move slowly, officials downplay significance. But reserve diversification is irreversible. Once countries learn to function without full dependence, they don't go back. Trade invoicing shifts, central banks rebalance, long-term contracts adapt. This phase can last years, but the direction never changes. The dollar has entered this phase. This is the most dangerous stage. Currencies thrive on networks. The more people use them, the more valuable they become. But networks can reverse. When trading partners accept alternatives, merchants follow. When merchants follow, banks adapt. When banks adapt, infrastructure shifts. At that point, using the old system becomes inefficient, not patriotic, not stable, just inconvenient. This is where momentum becomes unstoppable. We crossed that threshold recently. Every reserve currency collapse is finalized by a crisis. Debt panic, war, financial implosion, policy miscalculation. The trigger differs, the outcome doesn't. Capital flees, reserves are dumped, currency value falls rapidly. Authorities face impossible choices: tighten and crash the economy, or print and destroy purchasing power. There is no painless option once this stage begins. The only uncertainty is timing. Replacement doesn't mean disappearance. The old currency remains, but loses dominance. The future may be multipolar, several currencies sharing influence. It may involve commodities anchoring trust again. Or it may center on systems that prioritize neutrality over control. What matters isn't ideology. It's stability, liquidity, and trust. And trust is moving. Every reserve currency collapse followed this exact structure. Different flags, same ending. The pattern destroyed 3 global currencies over 5 centuries. Each time the dominant power believed the rules no longer applied to them. They were wrong. We are not predicting tomorrow. We are identifying trajectory. The shift underway now will reshape trade, wealth, geopolitics, and living standards for a generation. Those who understand it early adapt. Those who don't pay the price quietly. This isn't about panic. It's about preparation. Over the next decade, every major signal will point to the same outcome, until the moment denial becomes impossible. If this breakdown gave you a framework you've never seen before, stay with this series. Because what's coming won't be announced in advance. History doesn't repeat, but it does follow patterns. And this pattern is already moving. Position accordingly.